Gospels and the book of Acts record the names of about 76 different Jewish people from Judea and Galilee at the time of the Gospels. We can compare these with names discovered from archaeology and from ancient literature, and that gives us new and powerful evidence that the Gospels are accurate and that they're reliable accounts of the events they describe. And we're going to take a quick look at this evidence now. So subscribe, press the notify bell, and off we go. Now, names change. The people, when they're born, are given names, and the names that are given to them change from one year to another, certainly from one decade to another. This is a table which shows the top 10 names given to children born in various different years from 1914 to 2020. So in 1914, the most popular name was William, and the list of names goes down to the 10th most popular, which was Henry, with things like Frederick and Charles and Albert being fairly popular. Anything in that top 10 was. If you look at the names in 2020, you see that they are quite different. And what I've done here is I've colored all the names that are in the top 10 in 2020 yellow, so you can see how popular they are elsewhere. Well, quite a few of the top 10 names in 2020 were popular in 2010, but before that, we rather lose it. And in 1954, 1974, none of the names that's in the top 10 now was in the top 10 then. So the distribution of people called by various different names changes from one year to another, and it also changes from one place to another. Now, imagine that you were in 100 AD and you're writing a gospel and you want to try and get the names right for the time of Jesus, crucified about 30 AD. That would be about like being now, 2020, and trying to, or 2021 really, and trying to find names that were popular in 1954. It's a bit more difficult than that for gospel writers, because one of the things we know about the Gospels is that they weren't written, mostly anyway, in Palestine. They weren't in Judea or in Galilee. They were written in places like Asia Minor, or nearly in Rome, or in other parts of the Roman Empire. So it would be like us trying to work out what the names were in the 1950s in, say, Germany or France. Something that we will probably not get right unless we had some very careful research. And the research that's possible for us wouldn't be possible for them. The people who were writing the Gospels didn't have access to telephone directories. They couldn't get on Wikipedia. They couldn't find out about distributions of names. They had to make do with what they knew, and they wouldn't know much apart from the people that they knew because they were local to where they were at the same time. Another table shows that the same thing happens for girls' names, but we'll think about the boys' names mainly because it's only a short talk. So there are two alternative hypotheses that are put together about how the New Testament came into existence, and particularly about how the Gospels were written. One of them is the idea that they are written from eyewitness accounts. They're written from accounts which were contemporary. The people who saw the events remembered them, and 20, maybe 40 years later, they wrote down what they had seen, and they wrote it with some detail and some accuracy. So that hypothesis is the Gospels are from eyewitness accounts. Might not be the writer himself who's the eyewitness, but the writer has access to eyewitnesses, but it might be one. The alternative hypothesis is the one that is pushed forwards by skeptics a lot. That's the idea that the Gospels are written quite a bit later by people who weren't there at the time, who are picking up on either oral tradition that been passed along from one generation to another, with many, many generations of passing on, and with some of the accounts being invented or very much changed in the transmission and in the writing. How would we tell the difference? Well, one way is to look at the distribution of names. How are the names that are used in the Gospels, how are they there to fit with the names that we have from other sources at that time? And if the accounts are eyewitness accounts, then we would expect the names that we find for people in the Gospels to match the name distribution for the first century for the Roman province of Palestine, or for Galilee, which was just outside that Roman province, as measured by archaeologists and in ancient literature. If the names were produced by someone who was writing much later in a different country, then we wouldn't expect those names to match the distribution of a first century Palestine. So that's the big test. Do the names in the Gospels match the names that we have from other sources for the same time and place? Well, let's decide which one it is. Well, we have very handily a directory of names put together by the Israeli scholar Tal Ilan, and she has collected by province and by time the names of various known individuals. So here's a table. This is the first 11 most popular names. So altogether, she's found from from Palestine, from Judea, and from Galilee, at the time of Jesus, 243 different people who were known either as Simon or as Simeon. Simon's a sort of Greek version, Simeon's the Hebrew version. In the New Testament, there are 8 people from the Judea or Galilee who are called Simon. Josephus lists 29 different people with the name of Simon. Ossuaries, they're bone boxes. When someone died, they put them in a grave, typically something excavated out of a rock, sort of cave, until the body decomposed, and then the bones that were all that was left were put into a bone box, the ossuary, and sometimes the undertakers would scratch the name of the person onto the ossuary, so you knew who was in that particular bone box. Anyway, 59 of those bone boxes have turned up with the name Simon on. So we've got 59 individuals there. And there's another 72 people called Simon mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, if you've been doing your arithmetic, you'll see that doesn't add up to 243. There's also first century Jewish literature, which would give you another picture of names, and altogether they add up to 243, and so on. So we can go on, and you can see the most popular name there gets a bit more unpopular or less popular. So someone called James or Jacob. Jacob's the Jewish name. James, Jakobos, is the Greek equivalent. And there's a lot fewer of those. Only a sixth as many people call that as we call Simon. And we can look at the names in the New Testament, and we can look at the popularity of the names outside the New Testament. What we have to do is to subtract these from that column and look at the result. And there it is on a graph. So the yellow bars show the names from the New Testament as they appear, and the red line, the red blobs, show the percentage of people outside the New Testament who had that same name. And you can see that, well, they're sort of the same. They're not completely the same. There's a certain lack of people called Jonathan, and Lazarus, Eliezer, is quite a low turnout as well. And there are rather more people called James than we might expect. But that's what you get if you take a random sample of things from a population. You don't get an exactly the same distribution every time, because there's a certain amount of randomness to it. And the people in the New Testament, they weren't selected by random, they're selected for a purpose, but the purpose had nothing at all to do with their name. It was to do with their character. So effectively, as far as names are concerned, it's pretty well random. And you can see that actually, it's not a bad match. It's the sort of match you would expect if you just drew randomly that number of names from the population that was available at the time. And in fact, there are statistical tests that let you check that up. Quite a few different tests. This one's a chi-squared test. And this figure here, the lower that figure is, the more unlikely it is that your sample has come from the population. We wouldn't say, oh no, they're different until P fell to 5% or below. We will be fairly convinced they were different if it fell to 1%. This is 25%. It's well within the bounds where we'd say, no, the two are from the same population. You'd expect a bit of difference because of the randomness, and this is showing that the two are from the same population. So the names in the Gospels match the names of the people in the population at the time the events of the Gospels were going on. It does change. If you go to Egypt, which is this table here, you can see that different names are popular. So the most popular name in Egypt was Eliezer or Lazarus. That's third in Palestine. That's not too dissimilar. But Sabbateus, second most popular name in Egypt for a Jewish child, is the 68th equals most popular name in Palestine. 67 other names that are more popular than that one. Joseph's quite popular in both, but Ptolemaeus, Pappus, they are pretty unpopular. And it's fairly obvious that the ranking of the names is quite different, the distribution with it quite different in Egypt than it was in Palestine. The Gospels match the distribution in Palestine. They don't match the distribution in Rome or in Asia Minor or in Egypt. They only match the names in Palestine. That's an interesting result as well. It shows that the Gospel writers managed to get the names correct for the time and for the place. That's something that they could only have done by using direct evidence from the time and from the place. So what have we seen so far? First of all, we've seen that names vary from one place to another and from time to time. So if someone is writing from a different place long after, they wouldn't expect to get the names correct. And that's particularly true in the ancient world. The names in Egypt are different from those in Palestine. The names in Asia Minor are different from the names in Palestine, and so on. The names for the Gospels, though, follow a distribution which is correct for the time and place of the events that the Gospels describe. And that's something that the apostles who wrote the Gospels, the evangelists, would find almost impossible to do by ordinary means, unless they were writing down something which was an accurate record of what actually happened. So a fictional account would not manage it. And so what we can conclude is that the New Testament is an accurate record of the events that it describes. But there's more. When you have a name's used to identify somebody. If it's a popular name, it doesn't identify different people. Several different people will have the same name. There's a list of people in the New Testament who are called Simon. And there you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. There's an 8th somewhere as well who I haven't got on the list. So how do we decide which Simon we're talking about? Well, one of the things you can do is you could give them nicknames. So Simon called Peter, Petros is a small stone, pebble, a bit bigger than a pebble probably. Cephas is the Aramaic equivalent of it, which you sometimes get as well. Simon the Canaanite is a different person with a nickname which would mark him out as being different from Simon called Peter. Another way of doing it is the patronymic. You call someone son of whoever it happens to be. So Simon Bar Jonah, you find the word Bar simply means son of, so Simon, son of Jonah. And you find this happens all over the place in the gospel. So, for example, Bartimaeus, we might call him now, but he's really Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus. So we don't know his name, but we do know his father's name. He was, whatever he was called, was so common that they started calling him Bartimaeus or Bartimaeus. So they could distinguish him from somebody else of the same name. And another thing you could do, you could call him by where he came from. Place of origin may be a little over the top. Cyrene was a city in Africa. Simon had lived there for a long time and come to them from Cyrene. So that's another way of distinguishing from one person to another. Here we've got a brother of. We've got the trade that they followed there. And here we've got another distinguishing feature. But those are used to tell one person from another. And you get that happening in the Gospels as well. And you get it happening in a way that's very sensitive to the context. Again, something that doesn't match any other kind of ancient literature, certainly doesn't match ancient fiction. So here's an example. So we've got Herodias bringing a daughter. Actually, quite a grown-up young lady, and she's danced before the company. And when she's asked, "What do you want? I'll give you something," she says, "I want the head of John the Baptist on a plate." Well, it will be embarrassing if she got the wrong John. So she identifies John as John the Baptist. But later on, the same part of the gospel, we get him just called John. There's no need to say John the Baptist now, because he's already been identified here. So John the Baptist is identified, and we don't bother with disambiguation afterwards. Again, something that would be difficult to get right if you're just writing it as fiction. Even more interesting when it's the name of Jesus. So Jesus is often referred to as Jesus of Nazareth. He was brought up in Nazareth. He came to Jerusalem from Nazareth. So in Jerusalem, he's known as Jesus of Nazareth, probably in Capernaum as well. But the interesting thing is he's not known as Jesus of Nazareth when he is in Nazareth. So in Nazareth, there'd be probably several people called Jesus. All of them will be Jesus of Nazareth, because any Jesus who lived in Nazareth was Jesus of Nazareth. So in this case, they identified him and say it's the carpenter's son. So they've identified him maybe as the son of Joseph. Well, the word carpenter's son might simply mean a carpenter. And they said, well, we know his mother. This is the carpenter's son. His mother's Mary, and he's got his brother's names as well. These all identify who we're talking about. They're disambiguating the name of Jesus. But again, the context is the interesting thing. In Jerusalem, he's known as Jesus of Nazareth. In Nazareth, he's known as the carpenter's son, or maybe the son of Mary, or maybe the brother of James or Joseph or Simon or Judas. It's something that, again, would take a lot of thinking about for someone in the period to produce. The set of different names of Jesus is pointed out again here. This is in one of the trials of Jesus, and we've got the high priest who talks to him. And you can see, first of all, the narrator refers to Jesus as Jesus. That's common in the Gospels. The high priest uses two other titles to identify Jesus: the Christ, the Son of God. Now, I might have got that from Psalm 2, but probably his agents had seen Jesus teaching and reported back what Jesus was teaching about, and Jesus says that he's the Christ, the Son of God, and the high priest wants him to confirm that, because then he can accuse him of blasphemy. And Jesus does confirm it. And you get another title of Jesus there, the Son of Man. This is how Jesus usually refers to himself, although hardly anybody else refers to him in those terms. Now that's the on trial of the high priest. Outside, this is when Jesus is entering Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, rather earlier on, and the crowd say, "Who is it?" And the answer that they give one to another is the prophet Jesus. The Gospels don't identify Jesus as a prophet, particularly they identify him as the Son of God, but not really just as a prophet. But here we are, he's the prophet Jesus, and then he's from Nazareth, but some people in the crowd wouldn't know where Nazareth was. It wasn't a very big town. So it's Nazareth of Galilee. So they're making certain that it's explained exactly who this Jesus who's riding into Jerusalem, who really is. But notice that the way Jesus is identified is quite different from the way that he's identified by the high priest or the way he identifies himself. Something which is very, very sophisticated, unless it's simply a report of something that actually happened. If it's an accurate report of a real happening, then that would appear automatically. Now, we can look at the frequencies of the way Jesus is referred to. So here we have the title. Jesus is referred to in the Gospels as the Son of Man 80 times, but in the letters of Paul, he isn't referred to as the Son of Man at all. He gets one mention in Acts and one mention in the last few epistles at the end of the New Testament, not written by Paul. And I plotted those on charts below, so you can see that the way the narrator refers to Jesus is mainly as Jesus. The way Jesus refers to himself as Son of Man. So those are the two most popular designations for Jesus in the Gospels. The letters of Paul are quite different. Jesus is hardly called Jesus at all. He gets called Jesus Christ or Christ Jesus, and he gets called the Christ. And he doesn't get called Son of Man at all. He never gets called Jesus of Nazareth. Right. He's not even called Son of God that often. Acts tends to refer to stuff that's earlier than the letters. It refers to stuff in the period of the first letters as well, but a lot of the action is earlier than that. And so we've got something that looks a bit more like the Gospels, but there's a bit of the way that the epistles refer to Jesus coming in as well. And the general epistles, again, not quite the same as Paul, written by different people, but nonetheless, the use of the Jesus Christ or Christ Jesus is much more prevalent than it is in the Gospels, and Jesus is never referred to as Jesus of Nazareth. He is referred to as the Son of God quite a lot, but not as the Son of Man very often. So we've got a picture of the way Jesus is referred to in the Gospels as being different from the way that the Apostolic Church referred to Jesus. So if the Apostolic Church is inventing stories and passing on traditions, then you would have expected the names of Jesus used in those to match the distribution from the time of the early church, from the time that these letters were being written, and not from the Gospels, which are reporting something that happened rather earlier. You can take it even further than that. If Ignatius of Antioch was one of the apostolic fathers, he was taken to Rome for martyrdom, and on the way he wrote several letters. So somewhere between 105 and 115 AD, he wrote a sequence of letters. If you count up the titles he uses for Jesus, you'll find it's like Paul, only more so. So he hardly uses the word Jesus. In fact, he doesn't use the word Jesus at all. He uses Jesus Christ or Christ Jesus or Christ quite a lot. Never refers to Jesus of Nazareth. Yet Son of God in 3 times and Son of Man in once. So that's very much more like Paul, and it's completely different from the Gospels. So if the Gospels were made up or passed on as traditions at the time of Ignatius, then the distribution names would be utterly and totally wrong. Jesus would have been, doesn't fit into the time of Ignatius, he fits into the time of Jesus. And the Gospel accounts fit the time of Jesus and not the times of either the letters or of Ignatius. That's another fascinating point. It's showing that the Gospels come from or report accurately things that happened at the time when Jesus was walking on the earth and before his crucifixion and before his resurrection, for that matter. Last point. There are lots of people who are quite minor, but who are named in the Gospels. Here's one of them, Simon of Cyrene. You get people like Mary of Bethany who gets named, or Martha, Lazarus. There are people who are named. Just pick on Simon. There are other people who are just as important who are never named. And the question is, why are some of them named and others not? And there doesn't initially seem to be a reason for it. There must be one, but it's not something that stands out straight away. And the obvious reason is that it depends on the first readers of the gospel. If the first readers of the gospel knew who we were talking about, then you can put the name in. If they didn't know him, there's no point. There's no point putting in a totally strange name. Why would they pay any attention to it? So Matthew, well, they've heard of Simon and they've heard of Cyrene and they've got some idea who he is. So Matthew's audience has some idea of Simon, but not a very strong one. And again, Simon of Cyrene in Luke, he's a bit better known to the first readers of Luke. First reader, it's Theophilus. But in Mark, we not only got Simon of Cyrene, but we've got the names of his two sons, Alexander and Rufus, or maybe he's got more sons, two of his sons. What does that tell us? It tells us that the first readers of Mark, at least, and quite possibly of Luke, and even just possibly of Matthew, knew who Simon of Cyrene was. And the readers of Mark knew him well enough to know who his sons were. And his sons only have one name each, so they're very well known to the people who first read Mark. That means something important. It means that those people who read the Gospel of Mark could actually go to Simon of Cyrene and they could ask him, did you really carry the cross of Jesus? What was it like? You must have seen the start of the crucifixion, if not the whole of it. What was that like? And they could get confirmation of that particular story. And all these names that appear in the New Testament give away the identity of people who could be asked by people who read the Gospels and asked to confirm whether the things that are described in them were accurate or not. And the point is, we now have 76 people, remember, so we've got 76 eyewitnesses to the things that are described in the Gospels. Okay, by the time that the last Gospel was written, quite a few of those might have been dead, but there'd still be a significant number of them alive, and the ones named are named because they're alive or because they're famous. So there are plenty of people who can confirm the accounts in the Gospel, and we can deduce that from the way that the names are used in the Gospels. Interesting point. The Gospels do, of course, make this claim to be eyewitnesses, or at least to contain eyewitness testimony, not quite the same thing. So Luke here refers to eyewitnesses, things that Theophilus has been told by eyewitnesses. That tells us that the eyewitnesses still existed. It wasn't long afterwards when they died, they were still around and they were telling people things. Theophilus isn't sure whether what they're telling is completely accurate, and Luke is going to put that right. And he investigates it carefully. And he investigates it from the beginning. Now, when an ancient writer says from the beginning, he's talking about from its source. That's what he's really meaning. So he's gone back to the source, he's gone back to the eyewitnesses, he's gone to the places where things happened, and he is writing down an orderly account of what happened. And why? Well, first of all, he's used first-hand evidence, but he's done it so that Theophilus can know the exact truth about the things he's heard of. So Luke, that means Luke's found out what the exact truth is, or he tells us he has, and Theophilus is finding out from the Gospel of Luke what the truth is, and he's using that as a way of doing quality control on the accounts that are being told him by other people. Here's another claim to eyewitness status. This is from the first letter of John. It's written by the same person who wrote the Gospel of John, and it's probably a letter which went round with the Gospel, introducing the Gospel to the people who first read it. And it's certainly a claim to our eyewitness status. He talks about that which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon and have touched with our hands. You couldn't find a more direct way of saying this is eyewitness testimony. He carries on, he says, we've seen it. And he talks about that which we have seen and heard. He's very, very keen on telling the people who read his letter and his gospel that what they were reading were eyewitness accounts. There aren't any in the letter, they only appear in the gospel. So it's a very, very clear claim to be an eyewitness. And John is making that to the people he writes a letter to, and they were people who were in a place to find out whether he really was or not, or whether he was spinning them a story. So John claims to be an eyewitness, and he claims to be an eyewitness to people who would know whether his claim was correct or not. The other thing is, of course, that the apostles were chosen to be witnesses. Jesus, in John chapter 15, shortly before his crucifixion, says to the apostles, you will also bear witness because you have been with me from the beginning. It could be the beginning of his ministry, or it could be from the source of the information. Whichever one it is, it's talking about an accurate account of what Jesus said and did. And Jesus has chosen the apostles so they can give a witness to that. It's a picture of people who are telling what happened to Jesus, what Jesus did, what Jesus said, and they're going right back to the beginning, and they're in one bound. They're not talking about what they've heard from people who've heard it from people who heard it from people. They are going right back to the start and telling the story that they've seen. This claim to eyewitnesses, there we are, there are 3 of them we just looked at, but there are a whole host of claims to be eyewitnesses. There we have some of them from the New Testament. There are more which I haven't included. So the eyewitness claim is there. People occasionally say, oh, the Gospels never claim to be written by eyewitnesses. Well, they do. And the rest of the New Testament talks about them as eyewitnesses and talks about the apostles as eyewitnesses. It does it throughout. It's a common picture. So let's see what we've seen. First thing we saw is that if you look at the distribution of names in the New Testament, then that matches the distribution of names that you find from other sources from Judea and Galilee at the time of Jesus. And that's something that the disciples who wrote the New Testament would be highly unlikely to get right if the account was fictional, or if it was passed on from generation to generation to generation by tradition, or if it was simply freely adopted, freely adapted and changed from some other document. They get it right. They couldn't do that unless they were giving an accurate account of something that really happened. Second point is that if you look at the way they use the names, they use it in a very sophisticated way. You'll see the disambiguation changing from one user to another, and they don't do it the same way that the early church used names. That the people who received Paul's letters would have done it differently. So would the people in the 2nd century early on. And in fact, it gets more and more different from the Gospels the longer the history of the church goes on. So we've got something in the Gospels which wasn't invented by the early church, but does fit the picture of the actual events themselves. And the third thing is that the presence of names in the Gospels identifies eyewitnesses. There are 76 names. It identifies 76 eyewitnesses, some of whom might have died by the time the Gospels were written, but nonetheless, they identify people who could confirm the stories that the Gospels were telling us about. So what he's telling us really is that the Gospels are true. They are an accurate and a reliable record of what really happened. And that's something that is really very important, especially if you want to investigate Christianity in any way. So let's invite you to write comments in the comment section below this, so we see what you think of what we've said. If you want more information, you can go to the Gospel Online website. That's the address for it, or you can go to BibleThink, where there's some evidence about the reliability of the Gospels. So we hope you'll do that. We hope you'll subscribe and keep on coming back and seeing more of the videos. And we hope that you'll really investigate the teachings of Jesus and of the New Testament.